Hi students, welcome to our physics class. Our chapter name is friction. In the last two classes we are discussing about this chapter. Today we are going to conclude this, and in the last class we discussed about the topic how to increase the friction. How to increase the friction. Now we are going to study how to reduce or how to decrease the friction. How to reduce or how to decrease the friction. There we have certain modes to reduce the friction, and we want to study that because we are increasing the friction because it has certain advantages, and at the same time this friction is having certain disadvantages, and that's why we are decreasing the effect of the friction. Now the question is how we can reduce or decrease the friction. We are going to look. When we are playing the caroms, why we are putting some powder on that? What is the reason? That is, when we are playing caroms, we are putting some fine powder on the carom board. What is the reason for that? The reason is actually we want to reduce the friction of the board and the carom coin. That is, we want to reduce the friction between the carom coin and this board. That's why we are adding certain type of powder on this. So in this case, the reducing the friction by we are adding the powder. The next question is why we are adding certain type of grease on the gate and other machines. Why we are adding grease on the gate and other machines? What is the reason? Here also we are adding this grease, or in certain machines we are adding oil. Like things we are adding because to reduce friction. So this all we are adding to reduce friction, and I am calling these all things as lubricants. Lubricants. These all are lubricants. So which are the examples for lubricants? Grease, oil, and also we have another lubricant, and it is called graphite. Graphite. So these three are the examples for lubricants, and the thing lubricant is doing that it reduces the friction between the surfaces. Now the question is what this lubricant is doing. When we are applying the lubricant, we already said that the reduced friction. How this friction is reducing? If we can explain using the surfaces, just look what is happening in between the layers. We already said that for the friction we need two surfaces. That means this friction is acting between two surfaces. When one object or one thing is moving on the surface of another, they have certain type of friction. So just look. We said that the reason for friction is the irregularities on the surface of the objects. The irregularities that is there on the surface. And we know they are getting interlocked, and that's how they are taking friction and all. Now I am doing that. I am just putting lubricant in between the layers. That means I am just putting some lubricant in between the layers. That means now it is not at all possible to interlock these irregularities. Not possible to interlock. Not possible to interlock these irregularities. That is actually happening here by adding lubricant. So this is the thing takes place when we are adding lubricant, and when we are adding lubricant, then the surface do not able to interlock each other, and that's how they reduces the friction. Now the question is how we can define this term lubricant. Lubricant is a substance which reduce friction are called lubricants. So we can say the substances which reduce friction are called lubricants. The substances which reduce friction are called lubricants. So this is all about these lubricants, and we want to remember the examples. It is oil, grease and graphite. These are the examples. And want to remember what is these lubricants are doing here. That means when we are adding the lubricants, it is unable to interlock between the surfaces. That is the thing here takes place. And also there have one thing. For different surface, we are using different types of lubricants. That means in certain cases we are using grease, in certain cases we are using oil. Like the type of lubricant is different, and we are using different lubricants for different cases. The next question is it possible to eliminate the total friction in a surface? That means, is it possible to make the friction equal to 0 by adding certain type of lubricants? Or is it possible to put some polish, taking too much and polish, and is it possible to make the friction 0? Actually, it is not possible, because even we are adding certain type of lubricants, still there occurs the irregularities. Even within any type of smooth surface, there is having certain type of irregularities and some sort of holes or like things. And sometimes we not observe it by our eyes, but when we are looking through a microscope, we can see it properly. So that is the answer for that. This is all about this lubricant. Now the question is it possible to reduce the friction using another methods? We have certain types, and now we are going to discuss about that. That is, how we can reduce friction rather than the methods of using lubricants. You can see certain type of luggage bags which is having small tires, and we are calling it as some sort of trolleys and all. So it is having tires. Why these tires are adding on this? What is the reason for that? Is it having any useful thing for this bag? Definitely yes. That means when we are giving these tires, it makes our task easier. That means we can roll this luggage bag through the surface, and it is making easier by adding these tires. And that is actually, is it having any role with relating to the friction? The thing here, when we are adding the wheels, it is reducing the friction actually. It is reducing the friction. Now we can look another example. That is, I am just taking a piece of wood. I am taking a piece of wood. A wood piece. Now I am going to do two tasks on this. That is, I am placing a hook on this and pulling to that side. That is, I am just pulling to that side by putting a hook on here, and it will move to this way. That is the first thing I am going to do. And after that, I will do that. I just roll this. That means, if this is the wood piece, that means I just roll this. That is the second thing and the first thing, I want to slide this. That is the two things. Sliding and here rolling. Now the question is it easier to slide it or rolling that wood paste? Which is easier? The easier one is that the rolling. This is the easier task, and here to slide it is little difficult. It is little difficult. In the both cases we have friction, and which is having less friction? Is it for this or this? We can say it as, in this case, in sliding case, the friction is high. And for this rolling friction, in this rolling case, the friction is less. Friction is less. And also here we have another question, that in which case for this wood more damage will occur? Is it for rolling this wood or for sliding that? Which is having more damage to this wood? It is obviously for this sliding. When we are sliding this, there occurs more damage than this rolling. So, these are two types of friction. These are two different types of friction, and I am calling this as rolling friction. Rolling friction, and this is sliding friction. This is rolling friction and this is sliding friction. So, we are going to define this rolling friction as when one body rolls over the surface of another body, the resistance of its motion is called rolling friction. That means when an object is rolling on the surface of another body, which means this body is rolling on the surface of this book, then what happens? There occurs a resistance. Whatever the motion is, there occurs a resistance. So, there occurs a resistance, and we are calling that resistance is called rolling friction. The next is sliding friction. So, I am going to define it as when an object is sliding through another object, there occurs a resistance for its motion, and it is called sliding friction. That means when an object is sliding, which means moving. When an object is sliding through the surface of another object, there occurs a resistance for the motion, and it is called sliding friction. So this is the two types of friction, and this is one of the very good example for this rolling friction and sliding friction. Now, which is higher, rolling or sliding? The sliding is greater than rolling. You want to remember that sliding friction is always greater than rolling friction, and also the damage will be also greater in sliding friction. In your textbook, they just give one of the example or activity, like they just put some of the pencils . Put some pencils like this. Now just take a book and put on this pencil, and they want to roll this. That is the first thing. The second thing is that there is no pencils and all, just want to slide this. Slide this book. Which is easier to move? It is obviously this. That is because here takes place is rolling friction, and normally it is sliding friction. That's why for this, when we are putting the book on this is more easier than when we are just putting the book normally on surface and slide. So this is also one of the examples for showing the rolling friction is less than the sliding friction. And also the speed of this object is more than this. The speed of object is more than that, because there present these pencils and there occurs the rolling. So this is all about this topic, and the thing is, in this last area we all discussed about the friction takes place in different surfaces. That means we are talking about the tires of vehicles, we are talking about book, table, chalk, like all the things. These all are actually the friction takes place in solids. These all are friction takes place in solids. Now we want to discuss about the friction that takes place in fluids. Fluids. First question is, what is this fluids? Actually, the things that flows we are including in these fluids. Generally we can say liquid and gas. Means we are not adding both these. The liquid and gases are generally we are calling it as fluids, or we can say in fluids it includes liquids and gases. So we can say for the fluids, liquid is one of the example, and also for example for these fluids, gas is also one of the example. So we can say generally we are calling solid and fluids. That is the two things, solid and fluid. In this fluid it contains air, means the gas and liquid. So that is the thing about this fluid. You want to remember, in the fluid there contains liquid and gas, or we can call both the liquids and gases are fluids. The next topic is, we want to discuss the friction that is dealing in fluids. That is the friction is in the air, and is the friction is there in water. That is the two questions here. Is it possible to having such a resisting force in liquids and gases? Actually, we have certain type of friction there in both air and liquids, or in both gases and liquids. There is having a frictional force, and that frictional force is also called drag. That frictional force is also called drag. That means the frictional force that exerting on or feeling on the fluids are also called drag, or you can generally say it as frictional force. The next thing is, which are the things that depends on the frictional force of these fluids? There are certain things that depends the force, and they are: first one is shape of the object. Shape of object. That means when the aeroplane is moving through our air, it is having certain amount of friction that is exerted by air. The next one is nature of fluid. Nature of fluid. For example, I am just taking one beaker of kerosene, one beaker of oil, one beaker of glycerin, other beaker of honey. So I am just taking some beakers, kerosene, oil, glycerin, honey, like different types of liquids. And you know, all these liquids are behaving different. And when you are just putting something in these fluids, you can see that some of the substances will move faster through this. Some of will be fastly and some will be slowly moving through this, which means that each of the fluid are behaving differently, and we can say the nature of fluid is different. And we know the air is also a type of fluid, and that is also behaving different. So we can say it as for different fluids, they are behaving different, and also we can say the fluids that exerting friction is also different. That is the second point is nature of fluid, and also there is one thing, speed of object. Speed of object. So basically three things are depending for the friction in the fluids. That is the shape of the object, nature of fluids, and speed of objects. These are the three things. And also for the high friction there occurs certain type of energy loss, and we want to reduce the friction in these fluids. How we can reduce? The one point is that the shape of the object will depend. We already said that. So when we adjust the shape of the object, we can reduce the friction in the fluids. We are just going to look how we are adjusting the shape of the object and the friction can be reduced. The first case is boat that is traveling through water. You can see that it is having certain shape. That means when we are looking through the top, that is the top view, the boat is having such a shape. That means a shape like this. And when we are looking for the fish, it also having certain type of shape. Here also you can see a shape, a conical shape. And when we are looking for the birds or rockets, for the rockets, again we can see the same shape is there. And for the birds, you can see that that birds also having beak, and it is also such a shape. And even when we are looking on our nose, it is also having certain type of shape, and these all are to reduce the friction. That is for the boat, it is designed in such a shape, and you can't see the boat in such a shape. That is because we are designing these all to reduce friction. In this case, we design to reduce the friction in water. For these rockets and aeroplanes and all the birds, all these are designed to reduce the friction in air. So, this all we can call it as a name, and it is streamlining. 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 So how we can explain this streamlining? The process of adjusting the shape of substances or things to reduce the friction are called streamlining. That means the process of adjusting the shape to reduce the friction of certain substances are called what? The streamlining. And this is all about our chapter. In this chapter we basically totally deal with the friction, and in the first area we discussed about what is friction and we defined it, what is friction. Then we discussed about the advantages and disadvantages of friction. Advantages means the good things and disadvantages means bad things. After that we discussed about how to reduce the friction, and then we discussed about how to increase the friction. That means we add lubricants like all the things, and we increase and reduce the friction. That is the area we deal with. After that we discussed about the friction that is acting in fluids. Fluids means the friction in air and friction in water. These all are the things in this chapter. You please want to read your textbook. We will meet in our next class. It's enough for today. Thank you.